Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something really complex, honestly, often pretty bewildering.
Yeah, it's the strange alignment you sometimes see, isn't it, between certain Western progressive views and regimes or movements that seem, well, completely opposed to core progressive values.
Exactly. We're focusing particularly on what some have called the red-green alliance, so leftists and Islamists.
It's a massive paradox. I mean, think about it. Why would some Western feminists or, say, gay activists seem to defend or even align with places like Iran, a regime that literally executes gay people and murders women? The disconnect is just huge.
It really is. And for this deep dive, our main source is a pretty compelling YouTube interview with Nuria Khan. She's an ex-Muslim advocate, and her personal story gives this, well, a unique and, frankly, quite chilling perspective.
So our goal today, our mission, if you like, is to unpack this whole thing, try to understand the history, the ideology behind it.
Right. Look at the real-world impact, both, over there and closer to home here in the West. And also consider the personal side, the toll it takes. Let's get started.
Okay, so to really lay the groundwork, we need to understand the ideas floating around that might explain this paradox.
There's this theory, mentioned in the source material, about what happened after World War II, particularly in Germany, but kind of across the West generally.
Yeah, this idea of a moral coma, almost. A sort of collective acknowledgement, maybe guilt, that painted the West as inherently oppressive, inherently evil.
And out of that, supposedly grew this concept called neo-universalism,
Cool.
which is, well, it's the idea that non-Western groups, and Muslims specifically in this context, are seen as inherently innocent.
Morally pure, almost. They get a kind of free pass, especially if they're anti-Western or anti-American. If you're against the oppressor, your own actions aren't scrutinized in the same way.
And you definitely see this playing out, apparently, on Western university campuses.
Oh, absolutely. The source mentions student unions protesting for groups like Hamas or even the Iranian regime.
There's even a specific example cited a politics textbook at King's College London reportedly stating, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, specifically about Hamas.
It leads to these, well, bizarre situations described in the source, like people walking around London apparently with pictures of the Ayatollah.
Right, openly supporting a theocratic, brutalist regime.
Hmm.
And the explanation offered is this extreme anti-Western stance where kind of normal moral judgment just gets suspended.
If they're anti-West, nothing else matters. It's a worrying thought.
To really get the weight of this, maybe we should look at Iran itself, its history.
Definitely. Because Iran, before the 1979 revolution, say in the 1960s, it was, well, described as definitely a much better place to be a woman.
Yeah, you see the photos from back then, and it's really striking. Women at universities wearing miniskirts, hair showing.
At the beach, looking, I mean, the source says like a picture of the West. Women had the right to vote. They were being empowered. It was just different.
Fundamentally different. Then comes 1979, the revolution.
Fueled by the so-called Red-Green Alliance, leftists and Islamists together that toppled the Shah.
But the key thing, often missed, apparently, is who ended up in power. It was the Islamists.
Which, according to the source, was not what many on the Western left were expecting at all.
And the results were immediate and brutal. Within just 2 years, thousands and thousands of executions.
Yeah, which leads to this narrative about useful idiots.
Right, the idea that Western leftists, by supporting the Islamists, thought they could use them.
But ended up getting devoured in the process. The analogy used is feeding the crocodile hoping it would eat them last. It's a harsh image.
It is. And what's really surprising, or maybe not surprising if you believe history repeats itself, is the kind of intellectual cover given to it at the time.
You mean figures like Michel Foucault?
Exactly. Described as a darling of this identity-obsessed left. He reportedly called the Ayatollah's regime a spiritual revolution, political spirituality.
Wow. Even with the clear outcomes, these ideas can still seem attractive, can't they?
Which brings us to the brutal realities of the theocratic rule that followed.
It's undeniable. The source is explicit. The regime is murdering women for dancing, executing gay people.
And the case of Masajina Amini, a Kurdish Iranian girl, Her death was so public.
Beaten by the morality police, reportedly, just for showing 2 strands of her hair.
Hmm.
And she died.
Just tragic. And her death ignited this huge nationwide uprising.
Yeah, women taking off their hijabs, recording themselves dancing, real acts of defiance.
And that White Wednesday movement.
Right, where women would wear white or just take off their hijabs, even subtly, and send these videos to activists like Masih Alinejad, using social media to fight back.
Yeah, so maybe clarify the Ayatollah's role in all this. What does that title mean?
Well, an Ayatollah in Shia Islam is seen as a leader with divine authority on earth, essentially holding the place until the return of the hidden imam.
And Khomeini, the one who sparked the 79 revolution, he'd actually been exiled, hadn't he?
Yeah, to France, interestingly, then brought back. The goal for an Ayatollah ultimately is often seen as extending that influence beyond just Iran.
And internally, Iran isn't monolithic, is it?
Not at all. The source describes it as a mosaic of various ethnicities: Persians, Kurds, Azeris, Arabs, Baluchis.
And the idea that the Islamic regime unites them is thin.
Very thin, apparently. Minorities feel suffocated. Non-Persian languages aren't encouraged. Kurds face disproportionate executions, especially these cool berries carrying goods across the border.
Shot point blank, the source claims.
Yeah. And Baluchis kept severely impoverished, so lots of internal tension under that religious facade.
It's interesting, the source notes a contrast with Afghanistan.
Right, where reportedly many might prefer Taliban rule to other options. But in Iran, the sentiment described is different. People apparently saying things like, "We're not Arabs, we hate Islam," or "Islam is not our religion."
Almost like the suggestion is you need a taste of real Sharia to want to overthrow it. It's a provocative thought.
It is, and it ties into this Iranian dream mentioned the desire to go back to being called Persia.
Reclaiming that pre-Islamic history, Zoroastrianism, Persian rugs, Persian cats, sort of distancing themselves from the current reality.
Yeah, it's a symbolic rejection.
Okay, so that brings us to the warnings for the West, because the parallels drawn are pretty stark.
The core message is history is repeating itself. This most toxic alliance, as the source calls it, between leftists and Islamists is playing out again.
And there's a direct warning, almost a plea, aimed at activists in the West.
Yeah, specifically woke or gay activists holding signs like Free Palestine. The source warns them, you are going to end up with the same fate if Islamists ever gained power or control. Because, bluntly put, the Islamists are not your friends. It questions the understanding of who these groups really are and what they stand for.
That's incredibly sobering. And the concern extends to institutions here, particularly in the UK.
There's a claim that many UK institutions, the NHS, schools, universities, have been captured, that the rot, as it's put, runs very, very deep.
And you see signs of this, apparently.
Well, the source points to examples like Jewish people in London feeling extremely afraid, not even putting mezuzahs on their doors anymore.
Which suggests a really significant shift in the social climate.
Perceived as resulting from nonstop pandering, where ultimately the observation is Islam wins.
Okay, let's talk about the grooming gang scandal, because this is highlighted as a key example of that selective morality.
Right. The source describes a deafening silence from many feminist circles about these gangs.
Especially when the perpetrators weren't white. Which seems odd given the focus on supporting BAM women or the global majority now.
Exactly. And instead of focusing on the victims, the claim is that some institutions actually framed the discussion as something that was fueling race or creating class divisions within the feminist industry.
That sounds like turning the issue on its head.
The feeling conveyed by those affected is apparently one of being disgusted and betrayed, a sense that justice isn't universal, that skin color is all they see.
And the source gets into alleged religious motivations, which is very controversial territory.
Extremely. It points directly to Quranic verses. One about the disobedience of a wife, verse 4.34, which is interpreted by some as permitting hitting wives.
And other verses.
Verses that reportedly subjugate Muslim women and, crucially, imply that non-Muslim women are somehow not protected from male sexual violence.
Leading to horrific rhetoric allegedly used by some perpetrators.
This is what white girls are for, and our girls are for marriage. Just awful stuff cited in the source.
The source also touches on interpretations around child marriage.
Yes, claiming the Quran implies no lower limit, citing the example of Muhammad's young wife, and then these shocking details about some victims.
Young white girls reportedly being put on sex offender lists. prosecuted as prostitute.
and accused of enjoying brown men, while police, allegedly, were suppressing investigations in places like Bradford and Rotherham to maintain community cohesion. It's deeply disturbing stuff to report on.
Absolutely. Shifting to the wider political landscape in the UK, there are concerns about voting patterns.
Yeah, the increasing ability for the Muslim community or the Islamist part of that to be able to vote in blocks and change our laws, that's the worry expressed.
And it's not just theoretical.
Apparently not. The source points to how Labour's stance on Gaza led to some Muslim independent MPs breaking away.
Running campaigns focus solely on Gaza.
Yes, and reportedly stating openly, we are here to enforce Sharia, which, raises fundamental questions about political aims.
There's a specific MP mentioned too, Naz Shah.
Right. Who reportedly tweeted something to the effect that white girls who are abused should shut their mouths for the sake of diversity.
Which she later called an accident.
Yes, but apparently still implied that we shouldn't tarnish one group of people. It fuels the argument about selective outrage.
And this ties into how certain words are used.
Like diversity or global majority. The source analyses these as potential propaganda tactics, comparing them to fuzzy and friendly language used by past regimes.
Which loops back to that warning we heard earlier.
Beware of irrationality no matter how seductive.
So faced with all this, what does the source suggest can actually be done?
Well, firstly, confronting fear. The need to get over the fact that speaking out about things like grooming gangs might get you labeled racist or Islamophobic.
Okay, and accountability.
Huge emphasis on that. The British-Pakistani community needing to publicly distance themselves from these behaviors, drawing a parallel to Catholics condemning abuse in the church.
Contrasting it with what's described as a deafening silence from community leaders.
Right. And then there are policy suggestions like looking at a Danish model of forced integration, trying to move away from heavily ghettoized areas like Bradford and Rochdale.
But the overall outlook presented is not optimistic.
No, pretty pessimistic for the near future. Talk of civil war floating around in the UK.
Wow.
And just the sad observation that it apparently took Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, tweeting about grooming gangs for the issue to get mainstream traction.
Leading to thoughts of needing a plan B, leaving the country.
That's mentioned as a consideration by some, yes. It paints a grim picture.
But let's pivot now to Nuriya Khan's personal story because it really grounds these larger issues.
Yeah, her testimony is powerful. She's third-generation British-Pakistani, grew up very religious, wore a hijab from age 9, memorized the Quran. Her granddad was an imam.
But then she experienced Islam in different contexts.
Right. She moved to Saudi Arabia in the 2000s, experienced Wahhabi Islam firsthand, the real deal, as she puts it.
Which involved
The religious police, the Mudawa, witnessing beheadings, amputations after Friday prayers, heavy gender apartheid outside her specific international school compound.
and no cinemas.
No cinemas, people had to drive to Bahrain or basically engage in what felt like drug deals to get movies, a very restrictive environment.
Then she moved to Dubai.
Yeah, which she saw as Islam light, more freedom driving cinemas, but still, religiously observant.
But that move prompted questions for her.
It did. Being exposed to more diversity, different religions like Druze, seeing Sunnis persecuting Shias, it made her question her own faith.
Especially the parts about hating others.
Exactly. Realizing her religion, as she understood it, told her to hate Christians and Jews while she was living alongside them peacefully. That created a huge internal conflict.
And then the breaking point came with her marriage.
Yes. She explained the cultural pressure. An unmarried Muslim girl is a liability. Marriage seemed like a path to freedom.
But it wasn't.
Far from it. It quickly became abusive. Emotional abuse, gaslighting, stonewalling, breadcrumbing, financial control. The whole awful pattern.
And Sharia law played a direct role in this abuse.
Shockingly, yes. Her husband apparently used an ancient Sharia concept called nishes, essentially, disobedience of a wife.
Based on that Quran verse 4.34 about potentially beating wives.
Yes. And he used this to try and forcibly return her. And the Dubai courts reportedly uphold this law, even though to her, with her British legal background, it felt like kidnapping.
How did she get away?
Dramatically. Called the British emergency number, was told bluntly, get out of there, and basically fled to the airport, even without her passport initially.
And even after escaping, the control continued.
Yeah, because getting an Islamic divorce, a talaq, can be incredibly difficult for women. Men often have unilateral rights, and there are huge backlogs at Sharia councils, say, in London. This leads to what she called post-separation control.
This whole experience led her to critique specific Quranic verses.
Very directly. She talks about verses advocating violence, striking disbelievers at their necks, amputation, killing infidels wherever you find them.
And she argues these aren't fringe interpretations.
No, she contends these verses often abrogate or override the earlier, more peaceful verses like no compulsion in religion that progressives sometimes quote, and that terrorist groups like ISIS use these violent scriptures quite directly.
And her critique extends to misogyny.
Yes, verses that seem to subjugate women, suggesting they're dumb, get less inheritance, need double the witnesses compared to men.
And the disturbing implication for non-Muslim women again.
Based on the verse about covering up, so that they will not be harassed or molested. The implication being, if you're not covered, you're fair game.
And her core argument is that people acting on these aren't misinterpreting.
Her point is they are often reading it in the most literal form.
Right.
That the problem is in the text for those who read it literally.
She also reflected on wearing the hijab herself.
Yeah, feeling a disconnect from everybody else. That it was an external thing that didn't change her inside.
And she observed an identity crisis among later generations of immigrants in the UK.
Yes, sometimes regressing, using Islam as their main identity, maybe more performatively. She felt the UK Muslim population could be a lot more extreme than in the US, partly due to these societal silos in Britain.
And just finally, on her testimony, the source notes how rare speakers like her are.
Absolutely. Prominent ex-Muslim voices are incredibly rare, which just highlights the immense courage it must take to speak out like she does.
So let's try and pull these threads together. We've covered a lot of ground: history, ideology, personal stories.
Nuria Khan's analysis really highlights the deep complexity here, doesn't it? All these interwoven factors, history, belief, cultural shifts, individual trauma, they all feed into the situation we're seeing.
And it really brings that Hitchens quote into focus, the one mentioned in the source. Beware of irrationality no matter how seductive.
Exactly. It often feels good to believe certain things, right? To align with causes that seem just on the surface.
But the material we've explored today suggests that seductive irrationality can have really serious long-term consequences for society.
Yeah. So if we take that idea seriously, that history might be repeating itself, it leaves us with a pretty challenging question, doesn't it, for you listening?
Which is?
How do we find the intellectual courage, and maybe the moral courage too, to face uncomfortable truths, even when they clash with narratives we like or alliances we hold dear?
To make sure we don't end up paying that price. Again.
Exactly. Something to definitely mull over.